There is an unusual and beautiful place in Virginia located in a place called Tazewell County. It's about 10 miles in diameter, and it is filled with some of the most fertile farmland in the state of Virginia. It is one of the most scenic areas in Virginia, and the landscapes are amazing, but it is truly an unusual place. You could call it the land that time forgot. There is no cell phone service, there's no cable television, there's no working post office, there's no newspaper delivery. It is completely off the grid of modern life. Back in 1748, there was a team of surveyors working for a local landowner. One night while they were gathered around a campfire, a surveyor named James Burke happened to toss some potato peels onto the ground near where they were having dinner. A year later, when the group returned to continue their work, they discovered potato plants growing where James Burke had tossed the peels. Somebody joking around said, "Hey, it's Burke's garden." It was a joke, but the name stuck. The area has been known as Burke's Garden ever since. Burke's Garden is a fascinating and amazing place, but it is a place you could drive right by and never know it was there. The only reason I know it exists is because I've seen it for myself. I've been there, though I ended up in Burke's Garden by accident. I think about Burke's Garden every time I study the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. Nehemiah was alive during the time of Artaxerxes, who was the king of Persia. Persia dominated the known world at the time. Now, I've spoken about Nehemiah before, so you may know that Nehemiah was a cupbearer to Artaxerxes. And what was the wonderful job of the cupbearer? What was he supposed to do? He was always supposed to drink the wine before Artaxerxes to make sure it wasn't poisoned. That's a job I want. Nehemiah was basically a slave. He was expendable. It was Nehemiah's job to drink from the cup, and if he died, so what? Now you can imagine that over time, Nehemiah actually developed a relationship with the king, and he did. He was always there to test the wine, so there was plenty of time. And Nehemiah did become a good friend to the king. And the reason Nehemiah was a slave, despite all this, was because he was a Jew. Now we have no history to tell us whether Nehemiah had ever been to Jerusalem, which of course is the holy place for the Jews. The Babylonians, when they conquered Israel, knocked down the walls of Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. How much of this Nehemiah knew when the story begins, we don't know. We do know that his brother and some others went to Jerusalem and came back to report on what they saw in Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah, being a Jew, was grieving over the situation in Jerusalem that had been reported to him. He prays about it. He mourns. It wears on him. And over time, it is obvious to everyone that something is wrong with Nehemiah. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine, this is Nehemiah talking, and I gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. Now think about this. He's admitting to the countenance that he had. He's admitting to what he looked like. He was sad. So the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill?" This can be nothing but sadness of heart. And I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" So Nehemiah has explained his sadness. However, he takes a huge chance with what happens next, because the king is concerned. And remember, I said he had become friends with the king despite his position as a slave. The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. Notice he prayed. He's thinking about, should I really ask this or not? So he prayed, and then he asked, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, Let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Now think about this. Nehemiah, a slave, is basically asking for some time off. Let me take some time off from tasting your wine so I can go back and help rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. This alone is shocking. Nehemiah may have been an official in the court, but he still was a slave. Slaves don't get time off. You have to keep working. And this is where we see the thumbprint of God. There are so many times we are in the middle of a situation and don't realize that God is working. Nehemiah prayed, and then he asked the king. Nehemiah prayed as he was mourning and grieving over Jerusalem. It may not have been obvious to Nehemiah at the time, but God's thumbprint is already on him. And this is one of those times when God's thumbprint becomes very obvious. Instead of banishing Nehemiah, Artaxerxes does something amazing. He makes Nehemiah the governor of Judea. He became what amounted to the mayor of Jerusalem. Not only that, the king offered supplies and help as long as Nehemiah says that he will return. He makes a promise that he will return to Artaxerxes. Obviously, again, they are friends. So Nehemiah plans everything out and gets his supplies, and off he goes to Jerusalem. Nehemiah went and he talked to the people first. He wanted to find out what they needed. He realized the most important thing he could do was rebuild the walls. They needed something there for them. They needed protection and to regain their self-esteem. Now, in most stories we find in the Bible, it seems like God steps in some amazing way whenever something needs to happen. Something miraculous takes place. Look at Moses and the Red Sea. What happened when Moses needed to get across the Red Sea due to the chasing Egyptians behind them? Suddenly God parts the Red Sea. Something miraculous happens. God does something amazing. Joshua fighting the battle of Jericho. They march around the city, blow the trumpets, and boom, the walls come tumbling down. Well, the story of Nehemiah isn't about miracles. It isn't about supernatural events. It's about God's thumbprint on a man who uses his God-given leadership skills to accomplish God's purpose. Nehemiah pulled the people together and said, "This is what we are going to do and how we are going to do it." He put a vision before them. He didn't say, "Let us sit here and wait until God does something. Let us sit here and wait until there's a lightning bolt from out of the sky and suddenly all the walls are built before us." He says, God has given us the talent. He's given us the skill and the will to do it, so let's do it. And guess what? They began to rebuild the walls. Well, there were some people who weren't so happy about this. The local warlords in the area, the gang leaders would be the ones today, they liked their freedom to pillage Jerusalem. This wall was going to be a problem. One of the warlords was named Sanballat. He decided he was going to stop the construction. Sanballat sent spies in Jerusalem to start spreading rumors about Nehemiah and to discourage the people. Gossip went out, but the walls kept going higher and higher despite the rumors and the gossip. So Sanballat said, got to come up with a different way to stop the walls from being built. What is a way to do that? Well, we could send armed forces in to attack the workers. When that began to happen, Nehemiah organized the workers so their job was only to guard and to be defensive in case somebody came to attack, while the other ones built. And the walls kept going higher and higher and higher. No matter what Sanballat tried, it didn't work. So he tried a different plan. Sanballat noticed that Nehemiah was different. He had a drive and an energy that kept the people focused. What Sanballat actually was seeing was God's thumbprint on Nehemiah, even though he would never admit to that. So how do you take care of a problem like Nehemiah? You kill him. That's the easiest way. So that's what Sanballat decided to do. He decided he would distract Nehemiah, get him outside of the walls of the city, and murder him. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, remember again, Nehemiah is talking. When word got to them that I rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors in the gates. So already here we recognize that there's amazing progress that has been made. They have built them up. No gaps in the wall. The gates are still open. So they decide they're going to send Nehemiah a message. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So already Nehemiah recognizes there's a problem. A village on the plain of Ono was simply a city outside of Jerusalem. However, Nehemiah again showed that God was working in him when he realized that this was just a scheme. It wasn't just a time to hang out and get to know your local warlords. He was actually being set up to be killed. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? I love this verse. Think about what he's saying. God has called Nehemiah to do this work, and he knows that it's God's work, and he knows he can't stop. If that isn't God's thumbprint, I don't know what is. He is so focused, so in line with God's vision, that he can't turn away for anything at all. All of us have places in our lives we need to work on. It could be in our relationships. It could be in our jobs. It could be in our families. It could be in our spiritual lives. Nehemiah here is saying, I will not lose focus. I will not stop doing what I'm doing. I am carrying on a great project. I am carrying on God's project. I won't stop working on it. 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. It's almost like, well, will Wednesday work, Nehemiah? Come on, Wednesday's got to be good. What about Thursday? Or Friday? Maybe Saturday night we could get together, go to the plains of Ono and talk? Come on, one of these times. But each time he said the same thing. I am carrying on a great project and I cannot go down. Why would I stop? When we are where God wants us to be and his thumbprint is on us, nothing can stop us. The truth is, had Nehemiah come down and gone with them, it would have been over. There are things in our lives that are the same way. We must complete them. We must finish the task or we may never have the chance to put things right. His enemies didn't stop trying. They spread more rumors about him. They sent bad reports back to the king. They claimed Nehemiah was actually planning all of this to attack the king of Persia. The warlords were hoping that Artaxerxes would force Nehemiah back to Persia. So they sent rumors back. Oh, he's building up and he's going to be this big king of Judea and they're going to attack Persia. You just wait. But the king knew Nehemiah so well. He knew him so well that he knew that this was impossible. Nehemiah would never do this. The king saw God's thumbprint on Nehemiah. He knew that Nehemiah had been touched by God. Nehemiah was even lied to by some of his best friends. But he never gave in. And he never gave up. They finished the wall. I almost think that Nehemiah got everyone to work faster because he knew how badly the warriors and the warlords wanted it stopped. In Nehemiah 6:15 we read these amazing words. So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. 52 days. Now to be clear, the wall wasn't around the entire ancient city of Jerusalem. But it was significant enough to protect them from the warlords. It was significant enough for them suddenly to have some national pride, to build up some self-esteem among the Jewish people. They had a place to feel safe. It was an amazing accomplishment to build the wall up from rubble in such a short time. Well, this is where we know that God's thumbprint was on them because the enemies recognized it. When all of our enemies heard this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. They saw the thumbprint. The enemies even recognized that God was working. They had worked so hard to stop this, but it didn't get stopped. But also notice something else. God has the power. He could have easily stopped the warlords himself. But Nehemiah had a plan. We'll set up armed guards to protect ourselves as we build the wall. Nehemiah had a plan. He used the skills that God gave him to accomplish God's task. I think we get so caught up in the whole miracle thing, and I love miracles. I believe in miracles. I believe that God does supernatural things even today. But sometimes we wait on God to do something amazing when God is calling us to do it ourselves. God puts his thumb on us and says, come on, I'm pushing you. Do it. Get out there. I believe in miracles. I believe in talent. I believe in skills. I believe in spiritual gifts. I believe there are people God calls to certain tasks at certain times, not because God is going to do something supernatural, but because God wants us to accomplish his purpose. We take something away from God when we don't see his thumbprint on the teenager who's praying, on the father who is down by his child's bedside in prayer, on the janitor who cleans the church each week. We miss God's thumbprint. I began by saying that the story of Nehemiah reminds me of Burke's Garden in Virginia. I was in college when I made a trip to Florida with a friend, and we decided to go off the beaten path. We didn't want to take any of the regular routes, so we didn't take 75, which would be the normal way to head straight down to Florida. We stayed off all of the beaten paths. It's sure nice to have time like that and be able to do something like that. We drove to Columbus, and then we drove east, and we took, I can't remember, 77 or something. We were in that area, but we decided to parallel the road using side roads and scenic roads all the way down to Florida. After passing through West Virginia, we ended up making a wrong turn, and we ended up traveling in a giant circle. Well, not a huge circle, but a 10-mile circle. We were actually in Burke's Garden and didn't know it. Now, when you're in Burke's Garden and you look to both sides of you, you see mountains, and you assume you are seeing two different mountain ranges because they're rather tall. So as you're looking out of the car, we thought we were doing fine. Now remember, no GPS, no cell phone, Rand McNally map, which wasn't very good. So we're traveling and we're going and we're looking around and we're seeing these what look like a mountain range on both sides. We thought we were doing fine. We had no idea that we were headed in what amounted to a complete circle. We were actually 3,000 feet up in what used to be a 6,500 foot high mountain that was composed of limestone. The limestone slowly eroded and the cap collapsed and it formed a valley. So when we were in that valley, what we were seeing and what we thought were mountain ranges was a single mountain. We were in a mountain, looking at the area to the outside while we drove in the middle, the valley in the middle that had been formed when the limestone eroded away. What we couldn't see and what we didn't understand at the time is what I found out many years later, because I didn't know at the time what we had done. The locals have another name for Burke's Garden. They call it God's thumbprint. How often are we traveling and not realizing that God has his hand on us, is guiding us, leading us? Sometimes it's only when we look back that we see the evidence of his work in us. I wonder sometimes if that was Nehemiah realizing, as he looked at the wall that he built in only 52 days with God's help, that wall was God's thumbprint. We could be right in the middle of something that God's doing, and in our minds we're thinking, man, I'm working for God, I'm doing this. Why isn't he going to do some kind of big miracle so that I know? God is doing things right now where you are, and you may not even realize it till you look back and see his thumbprint on you. You may not realize that surrounding you is God, protecting you and providing opportunities for you to do his will. When we surrender to God, he can use us, and he can leave his thumbprint on us, even when we don't realize that he's moving and working in our lives.